e vi rimanda ora paziente. Preparate lo streaming. Vi dice fase di reindirizzamento della pagina streaming dal vivo. Eccolo, l'ha mandata qui a questa pagina del live nostro, che si mette questo, quindi se ora io clicco, eccoci qua, e siamo già in streaming. A questo punto, per evitare rientri, questa la chiudo, non mi serve più. E torno tranquillamente alla mia diretta. Streaming.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new English seminar. And today I'm very happy to introduce Professor Stefania Taviano, who is Associate Professor of English and Translation at the University of Messina, Italy. Stefania Taviano has written extensively on theory, theater, translation, English as a lingua franca, translation and translation pedagogy, diasporic Arab hip-hop, and art activism. More research areas include ELF in context of migration, the interconnection between translation and migration through the arts, and translation and disability. She is also a professional translator and interpreter. So Stefania, I'm very happy to have you here today, even online. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia, for your introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry not to be able to be there in person. I like to interact with my students and the people who listen to me and watch them in their eyes. But anyway, so thank you for being here. This afternoon, we're going to talk about the theory of translation and the actual activity, let's say the profession of translating. Sometimes we tend to think that theories are not necessarily connected to the activities, in this case of translation, but what I'm going to show you this afternoon is precisely the opposite, the fact that theories of translation are so relevant to the activity of translation. The fact that I'm full screen is not allowing me to go forward.
Forward or any arrow on the...
Nothing is happening.
Okay, if you press ESC, maybe you may want to get back to your previous layout.
Which is what I'm trying to do, and it's not doing it. Oh, God. Okay, sorry, okay. Let's see, oh, sorry, I had to use the arrow on my screen. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so I'd like to start by asking you a question. What is translation for you? What does it mean and what does it involve? And I know it's not straightforward since I'm not there in person, but if somebody would like to volunteer and try and define what translation is for you, your idea of translation, please. Anything, any idea, basic idea will be welcome. And then Silvia, you would have to see how, like if a student wants to provide a definition, perhaps speak up or come up to you and use the microphone.
If somebody wants to speak, I can repeat on the microphone.
Excellent, okay. It's not easy to provide definitions, but as I said, anything that comes to mind, the first thought about translation. What is translation? What does a translator do?
Or maybe a word, a keyword.
Or keywords.
What again? Bridge. Somebody says bridge. Anyone
bridge. Else? Okay.
Anyone else? Sharing knowledge. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent.
Anyone else? Guys. Communication.
Okay, so bridge, knowledge, communication. Anything else?
Say it again. To carry across.
Okay, yeah, that's what the root of translation means, to carry across. Absolutely.
Any other words or thoughts? Sorry? Accessibility.
Accessibility, that's a very good point.
Interconnection. Interpretation, sorry.
Interpretation, there's also, apart from interpreting as another form, as a form of translation, interpretation is a very important issue that I'm going to mention. Thank you. Any other ideas?
Human necessity.
Human necessity, wow, that's very, very true. Translation is very central in all human activities, even if we don't think about it.
Exchange.
Exchange, yes, absolutely. Well, excellent. Any more?
Anyone else? Maybe not for the moment.
Okay, yeah. I mean, all the words that you mentioned have to do with some of the main ideas that I want to convey today. So let's start from the theories. And then, as I said, some of the key points that you mentioned are going to come up. Obviously, I'm sure or presume that you know the difference between a prescriptive approach to translation and a descriptive approach to translation. Well, the same distinction applies to linguistics and notions of languages, of course. Anyone would like to volunteer to make this distinction? The definitions, the terms themselves direct you to the meaning. Anyone? Oh, I'm sure you do, but you don't want to, say it right now. Okay. Well, as the terms imply, and as I was saying, this distinction applies to approaches and theories of translation as well as languages. A prescriptive approach tends to identify what is supposed to be correct and what a linguist or a language speaker, a language user, and a translator should do, what norms and regulations should apply. While according to a descriptive approach, then as the word indicates, linguists and translation scholars observe what is done through language use and translation activities. They observe and they describe. And most of translation theories nowadays obviously belong to this second category. Now, this afternoon, I'm only going to briefly touch base on some of the main theories of translation. There's no time to look into all of them, but I just want to take you to this, a certain direction, a certain, let's say, way of thinking about translation. Because theories of translation started initially focusing on texts. Newmark is just one of the most important scholars focusing on the importance of the way texts were translated. And he also introduced the distinction between a semantic translation, which tends to be, let's say, more reproduce a given text and the content of that text, versus a communicative translation, which aims to reproduce let's say, also the effect that that text has in the target society. Later on, and as I said, here I'm just jumping and providing you with a sketch of some main theories. A cultural approach and a sociocultural approach became predominant in translation theories with Susan Basnett, and again later on with Venuti, focusing on not only on texts and the way texts are translated, but above all on the ways in which translated texts become part of the culture and society in which, and the language in which they are translated. In other words, the way translated texts interact with other texts and the way they are perceived, read, received in the target society and culture. And Venuti, together with Susan Basnett as well, and other translation scholars, focus very much on the role of the translator. We are very much used to think, actually not to think a lot enough about the role that translators have. And I'm going to show you what I mean by this. But Venuti, for example, focusing on the role that translators have in the way they translate texts, has made that quite well-known distinction between foreignizing and domesticating translations, where, as the terms indicate, in a foreignizing translation or through a foreignizing approach, the translator tries and convey those aspects which are peculiar and characteristic of that foreign language and culture, while in domesticating approaches, texts which are translated are domesticated in the sense they are made more sound-like, as if they were not translations and they had been, let's say, written in the target language. Okay, obviously, if there are any questions, any doubts, anything that I mentioned which is not clear, by any chance you can interrupt me or ask questions at the end, whatever you prefer. Another very important element in translation more recently has been the ethics of translation. How and why translators should do the right thing. How should they behave? Pim, Baker are some of the scholars who talk about the ethics of translation, and very much related with the ethics of translation is the agency of translators. The role, again, of that translators have, as Polezzi and Inghilleri, among others, emphasize, because, as I was saying, predominant views of translation do not pay enough attention to the role of translators, and we commonly tend to think that translators are invisible, as Venuti claims, that they simply carry across, as the Latin root of the word indicates, a meaning from one language to another while being neutral. But this never happens in actual fact, but the opposite takes place, as we're going to see. Because when we translate a text, that source text is always related to the source language. Of course, it is written in a given language. It is related to a given source culture, and it is very much connected to the source society value system. okay, beliefs, things that are commonly believed, predominant views in that given society, obviously permeate source texts. Now, when we pass on to the target text and translations, Susan Basnett has always reminded us that translated texts do not exist in a vacuum. Translated texts are always connected and related to other texts. In the same way as source texts are, target texts are closely connected to the target language. They become part of the language, part of that target culture, and are obviously perceived and interpreted according to the target society value system. For me, what I like to convey today to you as students is that translation is a creative process. Precisely because language and cultural systems differ significantly, no translation whatsoever can be an exact Slavish reproduction of the source text. The concept of fidelity that we are very much used to hear and think about, the idea that a translation should be faithful to the source text is, in my opinion, very misleading. I think that it should be revisited according to the function and the role of the translated text in the receiving culture. Precisely because translation is not a neutral activity, it always involves the translator's process of interpretation and rewriting. Remember, interpretation was one of the key words that you mentioned, because as translators, we are very much readers and interpreters of a given text, no matter what kind of text we're talking about, whether it is a written text, an oral text, a video, or a movie. And rewriting is a concept that has been introduced by Lefebvre, for example, a very important translation scholar who I did not mention, who introduced this notion of translation as rewriting of a text. Translation, as I said, not as a Slavish reproduction of the source text, because this is impossible given the differences between languages. But translation is a rewriting of a given text, because you, as a translator, do rewrite that text. According to Mona Baker, translation is not a byproduct, nor simply the consequence of social and political developments. It's not a byproduct of physical movement of texts and people. It is part and parcel of the very process that makes these developments and movements, and we're talking movements of goods, languages, communication, and people. So that makes these developments and movements possible in the first place. As language mediators, translators, and interpreters are uniquely placed to initiate this type of discursive intervention at a global level. Baker, together with many other translation scholars, do emphasize the importance of translation in the global world. Cronin provides us with an interesting definition. Translators and interpreters are lubricants of exchange. They do make exchange possible. Again, not just exchange of goods or language. And going back to the ethics of translation, as Cronin emphasizes, translators and interpreters face a basic ethical choice with every assignment. Either they can reproduce existing ideologies encoded in the narratives elaborated in the text or utterance, or they can do the opposite. They can dissociate themselves from those ideologies, if necessary, by refusing to translate that text or interpret in a particular context at all. Mona Baker, for example, has looked at the role that translators and interpreters have in contexts of war. That's a very good example where the ethics and the ethical choices that translators and interpreters have to make are very evident. For Cronin, the role of the translator is more real and important than ever on a planet with an increasingly fragile biological and cultural ecosystem. Translation implies movement. From its Latin root, translatio, as we said earlier on, it indicates movement of people and attention, not an opposition between what is foreign and what is the same, what is similar. That's Loredana Polezi's definition. I like to think about the connotations that the word translation has in Arabic. Tarjama means biography, because this definition testifies to the close connections between translation, migration, and identity constructions. Translation is vital in migration. Can you think of examples of translation in contexts of migration? Can you think of the many ways translation is crucial for migrants? Obviously, I can give you some examples, but I'd like to ask you if you've thought about it. We saw so many migrants and asylum seekers arriving to Italy. If you think about migrants and translation, what are the first examples of translation practices that come to mind?
Mediating. Mediating.
Can you be more precise? What do you mean by mediating?
It's coming, Stefania, I'm listening, sorry.
Okay.
When they just arrived to a country.
Yes.
And there is a linguistic barrier, yeah?
Yes.
Because they do not know the language, and so... And that's where the mediator is fundamental in this case, and this is the kind of situation.
Yes, absolutely. This is the case of, in Italy, we call them intercultural mediators. And they are the professional or also non-professional figures who interpret for migrants, between migrants and Italian service providers who might be lawyers, social assistants, doctors, etc., etc. Yes. Any other examples? Okay, I'd like to give you...
Aspetta, Stefania, wait, there's another answer. Give a second, sorry.
Sorry.
Hold on, I'm listening, and then I'll repeat on the microphone, okay?
Okay.
On the legal level, for example, the mediator has a fundamental role for the immigrants, so he or she can help them to get a green card or whatever documents they might need on the place. Yeah. Okay, yeah. And I'm also thinking of the health system or the social care system, which is another important point. And there's also lots of projects about that and how to mediate with people, migrants, who do not speak the language. She was talking about the barriers that you can get when you go to a place whose language you do not know, and you're not well, and you need health care. What do you do? That's right, Stefania?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of intercultural mediators accompany migrants in many contexts, which can go from offices where they have to apply for, let's say, residency or a document, to medical visits, hospitals. And as you said, this is an area which is very much researched and which shows the obstacles in communication in those kind of cases. Yes, these are very good examples. I like to make you think of a very significant example, a significant example of translation for migrants and asylum seekers, which we might think is automatic, but it's not. Which is the transliteration of their full names, which can easily go wrong, making the documents invalid. When this happens, if they've applied for residency, asylum, all these bureaucratic procedures take much longer than already do. And in the meantime, those migrants become irregular, which means they cannot access any kind of service, social service, etc. That's a good example of how central translation is. A very simple activity like transliterating names, which if it gets wrong, it makes their lives impossible. Okay. Now we're going to move on to a different example of why and how the activity of translation involves interpretation and rewriting. This was a text that I got, as you can see, from The Guardian, entitled, well, there was an Al-Qaeda statement as you can see, a few years ago, but the example is still valid. The curse of death will not stop, was supposed to be an Al-Qaeda statement. And this was the translation into English, the way it was published in The Guardian. Oh, Bush, what have you done to America and its allies? Oh, Islamic nation, you must support the Mujahideen to victory. To purify all Islamic land from the filth of the Jews and Americans. For America to stop interfering between us and the tyrannical governments which rule Muslims, and for us to set up an Islamic caliphate state. Okay, I'd like you to look at this text and tell me what is your impression about this translation? In other words, what is it that you notice, or do you notice anything which might be problematic, which might indicate the translator's approach, if you see what I mean? Bearing in mind what I said, that translation is not an automatic activity, but is very much the opposite. What did the translator do here? What was his or her choices? If something comes to mind. Anything in particular?
Stefania, hold on a second.
Sure.
You come here? No. The word purify? Could have been translated into to make all the Islamic slang free. Mhm. Yes, because purify makes her think of a racist ideology or something, yeah, similar to that. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
Yes. She thinks, another student says that she thinks that the major issue here is
although widening is a part of the,
although whitening is a part of the translation,
in this case, it went too far
in this case, it went too far
because
because
neither first, the second, or the third are faithful
neither the first, nor the second, nor the third are faithful
in a certain
in a certain way. So what do you mean? They're longer, that's more meanings to that? Yeah,
longer, but the concept
the concept.
has been too much justified by our how can I say it, by our Western eye.
Okay, she says that basically there's some interference there with you can tell there is a Western eyes on there or a perspective, right? Yeah.
Oh, well, earlier on you said there's too much. In what way do you think there's too much? What do you mean exactly? Because I think you were going in the right direction when you were saying that.
Because of the length.
Oh, because of the length?
And also its form and tone.
Form, tone.
Because,
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. The tone, the style. Yes.
The tone. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. You wanted to say add something else? Sorry, you were saying because.
also, for example, I was focusing on the first one because it becomes like a prayer in some way.
Okay, so she was focusing on the first one in particular because it sounds like a prayer.
I heard, yes.
Okay, good.
Absolutely, yes. That is true. That is true. Anybody else? Okay, so we can. Exactly, the tone is almost apocalyptic. And we know the rhetorical conventions are very different. In Arabic, they tend to use the religious sermon tone, that apocalyptic tone, which compared to English style, where, irony and understatement are more common, this obviously, as you were saying, sounds a bit like exaggerating. So what I'm trying to say is that the translator strategy in trying to reproduce what we would define faithfully, in inverted commas, the rhetoric of the original reinforces stereotypes about terrorists and Islamic fundamentalists. Is this idea clear? I mean, while apparently, that's why I say, obviously, I'm not the only one believing that the notion of fidelity is very misleading. While this translator has apparently reproduced the text faithfully because it reproduced even the tone and the style, if you remember what I said earlier on, each text needs to be contextualized and inserted. It becomes part of the target society and culture. So once this text becomes part of the British culture, being read in The Guardian, it is obviously influenced by stereotypes that British people and Western people that we have about Muslim and Islamic fundamentalists. Okay. So it becomes a contradiction. It becomes obviously a negative, has negative effects. So how does the theory apply to the practice? Let's have a look. So as we said, the translator is not a passive reproducer of an original. He or she rewrites the source text according to specific choices. Every time we make a specific choice, determined by the language features of that text, of course, by language use. We adopt certain translation strategies and cultural practices of the receiving language and society. And the fact that we always make choices is confirmed by, this is confirmed by the fact that if we take a text and it's translated by 5 different people, we will have 5 different translations, precisely because each of us makes different choices. In other words, the translator has an active role in creating a text, as well as transposing the message of the source text in a different language. In other words, this text, the translation, has an autonomy of its own. And this helps you as a translator, if you will become a translator, or if you'll find yourself in translating a text, overcoming the dependency from the source text, because it is very common when you start translating, when you find yourself translating, if you don't have much experience, to be very much influenced by the source text to the point of wanting to reproduce that text exactly as it is. And that's where it becomes tricky. Oh, this is not very clear, unfortunately. Can you see? So my suggestions, if you can read them, if you can't, I will repeat them, is to relate each word and each sentence to the surrounding text. Make sure that that choice that you make works in the immediate and overall, in the immediate context, which is the text, and the overall context of culture. Make sure that your text is cohesive, that it hangs together, both grammatically and syntactically. Make sure that it's coherent. What you translate should make sense. This is not an obvious statement because, again, as I was saying, when you are too much, when you're so influenced by the source text, what happens is sometimes in translating, you translate with an expression or a word, a term, which might not make sense in the target language or might not be much commonly used. I also would suggest you to go back and forth between source text and target text, and to give the same attention that you give to the source text to the target text. Oh, sorry, this was why you couldn't read. I forgot about this fact. So that's what I just explained. So tricks and tips, again, if you find yourself translating or you become a translator, create a comfortable environment. Read and analyze the source text, translate it all in one go or step by step, leave it aside if possible, and go back to the translated text only, reading only the translated text. Try not to think about the source text and then double check if necessary later on. And revise and edit your work accordingly. Now, I'd like you to have a look at this text, which again is from a British newspaper and is about bureaucracy in the European Union. I'm not going to ask you to translate this text. What I'd like you to do is, and we can read it together and then you can go back to it on your own for a few minutes, is to think about the problematic issues and the cultural issues present in this text, which will be problematic to translate. Yes? So I'll read it with you. It's quite an interesting, peculiar story. So the title is Why Journalists Protect Their Sources. Shock horror. Barmy Brussels bureaucrats while aware their days ruminating about the thickness of popular tin-jarred cooking sauces and are hell-bent on poking their noses into the most trivial aspects of our daily lives. Is there no end to their meddling? That at least could be the only sensible conclusion after reading a spate of stories in the British press this week, which reported that a spectacularly obscure EU committee was convening to decide whether certain particularly lumpy cooking sauces are actually vegetable in disguise. Yes, you read that right, vegetables in disguise. Are they mad or what? Can you imagine a pasty-faced cabal of besuited officials straining dolmio or chicken tonight through metal sieves in dusty rooms of anonymous corridors? Well, yes. The truth is that most of us can, and such stories confirm all our worst fears about Brussels and the EU writ large. Now, I'm aware that there might be words that you don't know, but let's try and get the general meaning. And I'm just going to ask you, just to make sure, do you all know what dolmio or chicken tonight are?
I see lots of no's in the room. No, so
Sorry.
you might want to explain it. Yes.
Did you say no?
Yeah. No.
Okay. Dolmio, chicken tonight are sauces, basically, just sauces to cook, you know, to dress pasta or whatever. So they are mainly sauces. And in fact, that's what is explained a few lines above, lumpy cooking sauces. Okay. So going from the title, why journalists protect their sources, which obviously is ironic, and going through the article, which talks about tinned or jarred cooking sauces and vegetables and bureaucrats from Brussels who have to decide about these sauces. What are the elements which you think might be difficult to translate?
Good question.
Well, the article is quite dated. It dates back to 2002. And obviously, in the meantime, we've had Brexit and all the rest of it. But the attitude that British people throughout history have had, obviously I'm generalizing, but let's say Britain has had towards Europe is quite well known, or should be. Any ideas? Too difficult? Maybe? What do the questions indicate? You know, what is the journalist trying to do with those questions? Anyway, if this text is too difficult, don't worry. I'm going to give you a translation exercise in a minute. But just to tell you, this article expresses very well the attitude towards Europe, let's say European Union bureaucracy, and the extent to which bureaucrats might waste time and our money, let's say, to decide whether sauces like dolmio or chicken tonight can be defined as sauces or not. Because you might not think about it very often, but I'm sure you are aware of the fact that Europe decides what can be defined as what in terms of sauces, drinks, etc. You know, like the percentage of orange juice in orange juice and those kind of things. So it would be very difficult to convey all of this when translating into Italian, even starting from the name of the sources, which are not particularly known in Italy. Okay, all right. So let's move on to our translation exercise. I'd like you to think about how to translate this text, which is a menu, a British wedding menu. Again, first of all, you need to think about the characteristics, obviously, of this text. What is it that is peculiar about this text that you might identify as problematic to translate into Italian? But this time, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. Silvia, do we have that?
Yeah, I think it's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Starting from now. Or would you like to read it first? Would you like to read it first so that they can get used to the...
Yes, we can read it first together. Okay, sure.
Okay.
You know, as I said, this is a wedding menu, a British wedding menu, which offers a trio of shellfish, a mini prawn and crayfish cocktail with Bloody Mary jelly served with a king prawn bonbon, some blushed tomato and char-grilled asparagus with mozzarella and balsamic glaze, frittata of goat's cheese, butternut squash and courgette with a pea puree and pea shoots, roasted red pepper and tomato soup with creme fraiche and basil oil, supreme of corn-fed chicken filled with a mushroom duxelle, fondant potato and a Madeira sauce.
Wow, that's very rich.
Very rich, absolutely. It's rich in several terms, okay? So I'd like you to think about how rich, in what ways is this menu rich, on what kind of levels? And how can we convey these levels of richness and of wealth and cultural, let's say, references and connections, you know, if we had to imagine to translate into Italian? And you might decide, I don't know, let's say that you do this and then you try and translate, I don't know, at least 2 dishes. Okay?
We are at work.
Okay, fine. I'm here if anybody needs me, or if anything is not clear.
Your shellfish.
You're obviously going to look up any term that you don't know.
It's a big challenge, Stefania, also the way in which the fish and meats are cooked. It's really interesting. It's a cultural journey on top of the linguistic translation itself. I can tell from their faces.
Well, I can hear they're discussing translations.
Yes. Lots of debate also about the kind of fish and the sauce. The first sauce, I think, is particularly interesting. But the Bloody Mary needs to be translated properly there. Che punto siete, ragazzi? Almeno la terza voce siete? Siete arrivati alla frittata?
Che dicono?
Chiedevo se fossero giunti alla frittata.
Vabbè, dico io come dicevo, ne possono prendere anche un paio per tradurli, non dobbiamo tradurli per
Vabbè, giungiamo alla frittata che mi interessano questi pea shoots. Okay, 1 minute and we start again.
Ok. Okay, are you ready? Would you like to start sharing your ideas?
Yes, I think they are. Are you guys? Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, your impression, about this text. What is it that you notice?
What's your impression? The specific vocabulary used to describe all the parts of the menu, right? Yeah.
Also that
Yeah.
Also that they may incur in lots of repetitions because pea shoots, pea puree and pea shoots. So that might trigger repetitions in the translation, right? Is that what you wanted to say? Okay.
Okay.
Anything else? Any other thoughts? Voleva dire qualcosa in fondo? No. Okay, that's that.
Okay, apart from terms regarding, obviously, food and cooking, what else is peculiar about menus, though, in general? Menus, something that I've noticed in British, I would say also menus in the United States. Cultural issues. Anything?
Different kinds of foods.
Well,
for different countries.
Yeah, different countries. Yeah, exactly. We obviously find. Sorry,
Stefania.
Wait, did you want to report somebody's?
Yes, I'm reporting somebody else's. Sorry. A lot of French words and Italian words. Frittata, for example. So French and Italian words. Sorry for interrupting earlier on.
No worries. Okay, yeah, absolutely. We find a lot of French and Italian terms taken from French cuisine and Italian cuisine, like crème fraîche, duxelles, frittata, which is unusual, but again, it's taken from the cuisine. Okay, what else do you notice? Otherwise, let's go straight to your translations. Anyone who would like to read or comment her own translations, or talk about any particular issue in translating?
Should we start with the translation of the first entry so we can then have a discussion? Okay.
Okay.
Any volunteers? Maybe somebody appoint like this. Just to save time, because we don't have it. Somebody who wants to read the first one. Please. Okay, there was a creative translation, Stefania. You were talking about creativity, so that was your initial slide, and that it comes back. Trionfo di mare.
I was trying to have a more target specific.
So she wanted to have a more target specific approach, and that's where translation comes from for that.
Okay.
And then she maintained the cocktail as a word. Quindi cocktail di gamberi e mazzancolle. Con gelatina al Bloody Mary. In this case. And she wanted to maintain the source name. The name of the sauce. And that's clear. Yes. So she was puzzled by the served with, because she thinks that there can come with different. It opens up to many possibilities in terms of translation. And so, what was your? Servito con un tortino di gamberi. E voilà.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. There are obviously several options. Trio is something, that they put in the menus when they want to refer to 3 different shellfish in this case. But it's an interesting, very, very good translation, Trionfo di mare. Because also phonetically reproduces this idea of trio.
It's true. The sound, the
excellent
consonant sound cluster is reproduced. Yeah.
And Bloody Mary jelly, actually, it is a sauce which is used, because what we should say, obviously, from a professional point of view, is that translators translating menus of this kind first document themselves with the trends and approaches and terms which are used in Italian menus to try and see, and follow, again, obviously, depending on the translation approach, they might want to adopt those choices. Okay, what about the second?
Somebody else? Maybe from that way. Dai, vuoi leggere tu, per favore? Sì, dai. Però a voce alta. Grazie per esserti resa volontaria. Aspetta. Pomodoro maturo e asparagi abbrustoliti con mozzarella e aceto balsamico. Thank you. What were the challenges there? The sun-blashed tomatoes.
Exactly.
Ah, no, the sun-blashed tomato, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a big challenge, wasn't it, Stefania?
Yeah, again, there's a cultural difference in a way. We don't tend to specify, or we might even simply say pomodori secchi, but obviously sun-blashed tomato gives the exotic element, because what you find, I would say, in this menu and other menus in English is this exotic element through terms of this kind for those who read it, which is difficult to convey when you translate it into Italian, particularly for a term like this. Anyone had a different, made a different choice?
Vai. Sì, un'altra volontaria, Stefania, siamo... Pomodori secchi. Uguale con pomodori secchi. Invece lei aveva detto pomodori maturi, secchi. A due mani alzate, Stefania, wait. Pomodori essiccati al sole. E?
I think that's pomodori essiccati al sole is a bit too long and too specific to put in a menu.
Long and specific.
I don't think in an Italian menu we would do that. I'm not an expert on the translation of menus. I've done it, but I wouldn't say that it's commonly used.
So you say it's a good translation, but maybe for the purposes of this, of a menu, it might be too long. Is that what we're saying? Yeah. So we keep in mind as
again, is what we were saying earlier on, is the idea of reproducing what is written in the source text, but thinking about how this fits into the target text and the way this kind of text.
Yeah, also the length, the actual length of the words or the expressions that between languages might vary. Thank you. There's another student whom I want, this time real volunteer, with a raised hand, and she's about to say something. Vai. Pomodori scottati.
I don't think that's the idea. Pomodori scottati is something else, isn't it? Scottato in Italian is when you just quickly cook it for a second or so.
Aspetta, stop. Another two hands, Stefania. The sun-blashed tomato is actually gaining lots of attention here. Come on, let's go. Pomodori semisecchi. I have to do a big job here. Wait, semisecchi. Aspetta, Stefania. There was another student, and then there's Patty herself. Okay. Pomodori confit.
Ah, confit.
Sì. And Stefania, don't say anything. Patty, go ahead. There are two native speakers in this room, Stefania. They had to look it up.
Okay.
They did a Google image search.
Because it's not common to say like that in British English, obviously. If they're British, I don't know.
Pomodori secchi would be sun-dried.
Yeah, of course.
Aspetta.
I know. But the point is...
Stefania, she needs to finish, sorry. I know you can't hear her, so. Okay, so by doing the Google image search, they found out that it was a thing. Wait, hold on. And it does look like a brustoliti, that they are a little bit cooked,
Oh, wow.
but they
Okay.
had to look it up.
Okay, fine. I mean, well, it is very interesting because I assumed the sun-blushed tomato, they meant sun-dried. And there was a different way, more exotic way to express this idea, because obviously sun-dried is the most common, and it's very common to talk about sun-dried tomatoes. So I assumed there was an alternative the authors of this menu had chosen. So it's very interesting that actually by checking it, it's actually a more kind of cooked. In this case, the translation that was mentioned earlier on is fine, scottati, at this point. Although we tend to refer scottati to meat in Italian cuisine, but it might apply.
I might say that the pomodoro scottato is not something I'm used to, you know, as an
I've never
not even
heard
in high cuisine. So I guess that one of the options which were given by the students might be taken into account in terms of referring to the actual procedure or something like the cooking process of.
But you see why the reason why I find the translation of menus very interesting is precisely for this reason, because there are you find interesting alternatives in menus, which sometimes are even difficult to interpret, to understand exactly what we're talking about. So in this case, you know, Google was helpful. And as we saw, how many options did we hear? Several. And most of them were fine. Again, a question of choice. Yeah? Anybody else? Shall we move on to the third?
Yeah, let's move to the third, also for reasons of time.
Yeah.
We're left with 10-15 minutes maximum.
And I want to show you a video if we have time.
Yeah.
But I think it should be interesting. Anyone would like to shoot, as I tell my students, shoot the answer, to offer a translation?
Translation of the third one, the frittata, you go ahead. Stop. Frittata di formaggio di capra, poi zucche e zucchine con una purea di piselli e pisellini primavera. Aspetta Stefania, aspetta. Adesso vai. O germogli di piselli. Sì. Sì, però come la traduciamo? Perché in italiano is interesting, you know, difference. Zucca bebona. Did you research well? Good, well done. Vai.
Zucca
violina. Quindi the butternut squash e le varianti, Stefania, come tradotta in italiano.
Sì.
Ok.
Ho sentito.
Ok. Altre varianti? Ce l'avete? No, per il formaggio, Stefania. Qua c'è there's a controversy about formaggio di capra o caprino.
Sì, anche si può dire.
Cosa ci dici, Stefania?
No, okay. Yeah, as far as I know, they're good, both good alternatives. The problem with butternut squash is that some of the terms that were mentioned are also, in a way, let's say, more technical, scientific terms for the actual vegetable. I'm not so sure that they would go in Italian menu, you know, if they're very specific. I would leave those out. But the interesting thing, obviously, that the choice in this menu, the unusual choice to have this term frittata, which is kind of now tends to be known and tends to be found also abroad, outside of Italy. It's that you lose that exotic element when you translate into Italian. you know, to find a frittata on a wedding menu is not a big deal in Italy. So one might think of possible alternatives to render, to translate this term in Italian. You see what I mean? Silvia, se stai dicendo qualcosa non ti sento.
No, no.
Ah, ok. Ok.
No. I wasn't saying anything. It's fine.
Oh, okay.
Are
Well,
there any questions? Any questions? Aspetta. There's a question, Stefania. Are you suggesting that they change the translation of frittata into something else?
Oh, no,
Like
no.
tortino?
Tortino is already a better option. What I'm saying is, I don't want to give you necessarily an answer. I just want you to realize that when there are cultural specific terms or exotic terms which are very recurrent in menus, it might be interesting to find alternative which are more, you know, which follow the ways Italian menus are created. So tortino is a more interesting alternative, I would say, solution. Absolutely. Okay, so you know, I hope that this brief exercise with this menu just gives you an idea of all the options that we have as translators, and that we always make choices.
Can we go on the fourth entry, Stefania?
Oh, sorry, did you? I thought.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Let's translate it all, because there might be some.
Absolutely. Okay.
Some of them have finished, I think.
I didn't know that you had finished. Yeah. Okay.
Has somebody finished? Yeah, vai, dai, leggi yes. The roasted red pepper. Zuppa di peperoni rossi e pomodoro. Con crème fraîche e olio aromatizzato al basilico. Yeah, I think it sounds good. Any other options? Prego. There's a debate on the crème fraîche, yes.
Nowadays it's okay to, you know, use the term crème fraîche also in Italian, but at the same time, I think that I would find rather in an Italian, like southern Italian menu, like panna acida instead. And I don't know if it
says on Wikipedia that crème fraîche is a traditional seasoning of French cuisine, and that crème fraîche is a kind of panna acida with 30 or 45% of custard.
So the question is, panna acida or not panna acida?
Well, obviously, again, as you see, well, I'm very glad that you have this debate because there are two issues here. Both, if you like to cook and you're and you're an expert on sauces and crème fraîche, you make the distinction as somebody was. But it's a linguistic choice as a translator whether to keep that term, the French term and the French sauce, which is also called like that in Italian, because it conveys that exotic element, or to translate it with an Italian term, which makes it more, let's say, local.
Yes, but I think it's also true that the crème fraîche is just the crème fraîche, also in Italian. So I think that this is one of those cases where you just keep the original there. The French, of course, it depends how specific is the level of the cuisine and how much you want to emphasize the foreign element there, but also it's a foreign cooking element, an ingredient, rather than just being a linguistic. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I would have gone for crème fraîche, but again, it's a question of choice.
Let's go to the last one, the last entry. Somebody from there? Yes, bye, yes. It's coming, Stefania.
Okay.
Ok, la dico. Petto di pollo con pollo levato al gran turco. Forse di, magari, petto di pollo. Vabbè, poi andiamo avanti. Riempito con duxelle di funghi. Patata fondente e salsa madeira. Ok, grazie. Thank you. Any other versions of this chicken breast, prego? Sovracoscia di pollo ruspante. Vai. Ripieno di, dicevi, patè di funghi. Ok, quindi la doxella è diventata la patè di funghi, poi patate fondenti e salsa madeira. Grazie. Aspetta, Stefania, c'è un'altra, vai.
Okay.
Petto di pollo giallo. Ripieno di? Di una salsa ai funghi. Patate fondenti e la salsa madeira. It's a hard job to be here. Okay.
Absolutely.
It's a difficult challenge.
I can see.
Grazie, grazie.
Grazie. Thank you. I can see why pollo giallo. I would exclude something again which is too long, like non mi ricordo com'era allevato con il mais.
Gran turco.
I would go for something again. I don't think you would find this kind of indication in an Italian menu. Maybe pollo ruspante is a good choice, in my opinion. It is a problematic element.
Yeah, it conveys the same idea, but in a sort of a, equivalent.
More elegant.
More elegant as well. Yeah, okay. What about the duxelle, which has become a patè, se non sbaglio? Patè di funghi, no, cosa ha detto sui funghi? Crema di funghi, salsa di funghi, scusi. Salsa di funghi. What do you think, Stefania? What should we do in this case?
Well, again, duxelle is a term that you find like salsa duxelle in also in Italian cuisine. It tends to be defined like that because it defines the characteristic. So remember that I said at the beginning, be coherent. If you go for creme fraiche, then you maintain also duxelle, right? You need to have an approach and decide you have that and you keep that. Otherwise, you change and you have a different one. If you see what I mean, I wouldn't mix.
That's a good point, the coherence of the text and of the choices, which we have been talking about during the course. Once you take an approach, you should stick to it as much as you can in terms of choices, foreignization, and whatever concerns the text. Any other points? About the salsa madeira, I think it's the name of the sauce. I mean, you really don't want to make too many changes. All right. Any other questions? Do you have? As Stefania said, there's not really many. There's just not just one solution. There might be more than one. So the idea is to understand how we can approach the text and the best possible solution, within our own arrangement. Right, Stefania? Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
And so don't forget, be professional and enjoy the challenges of translation. Thank you. I don't know if we have time to show a video or not. You tell me, Silvia.
It's 4 o'clock. I don't know.
Okay. Then no problem.
Let's watch the video. It's a funny video. Yeah. How long does it last?
It's 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay, let's go. It's very funny. I've seen it.
I need to stop sharing.
And it's about menus. And what happens when you translate a menu without knowing what you're doing?
Well, it is about badly translating menus, which are surely have been translated with Google Translate. So it's basically what sometimes happens in real life, and it's the opposite of everything that I've been telling you. Okay, so let me share the screen again. Here we are.
Stefania, would you like to say also what is the Graham Norton show, so that they,
Oh, sure.
a few
Okay.
words, so they know the context, apart from Gemma?
Okay,
well.
yeah. What you're going to see is 3 minutes of a very famous TV show with Graham Norton, who was a very funny presenter, who always has, you know, it is like a talk show, who has guests on his show, of course. And he has this kind of moment where he shows funny episodes, menus. There are some about hotels and other types. So here we are.
E sottotitoli, Stefania.
Oh, sure.
Fraught with danger, ladies and gentlemen, because we found a selection of poor and some.
Sorry.
E se lo puoi ingrandire, così lo vediamo un po' meglio. Grazie.
Sottotitoli.
Premi inglese,
Okay.
basta, ingrandisci. And let's go.
Essentially lazy translations into English on foreign menus. Okay, so imagine we're all in a restaurant together, and I turn to Stanley, I said, what are you going to get? And Stanley might reply, well, I'm going to get the sausage and the father-in-law. Simply the images that conjures up. It must be some sort of toad in the hole. Yeah, it's getting worse. It must. Yeah. This isn't. I mean, really. I mean, I don't think anybody. Specific relative, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, you know. And I don't think anyone wants this German-type sexual harassment. But I don't think you can go wrong with a nice place of hand-shredded ass meat. Everyone's favorite. Do you want some more? Just another handful. What do we have next? What might go with that? Stanley, you know, what might go? The wine pairing menu. This is a special brunch for the weekend. I might have the fresh salad followed by a variety of opinions. You can almost imagine that on a menu. Yeah. Under a magic custom. But then sometimes people are just a bit lazy. So this one, there's bigger menu. There's some smoked cow feet, and then there's just cow something. You know, there wasn't there, just cow something. Just it's beef, innit? Just have it. That person took a bit of trouble. This next person couldn't be bothered at all. Item number 2 on the menu. Whatever. It's food, innit? It's food. It's only your dinner. You eat again. It's whatever. We move on to dessert now, ladies and gentlemen. Let's all have a bowl of nuts with scum. You can get strawberries with scum as well. You really want to push the boat out? Why not have some chocolate puke? And finally, is there anyone who doesn't like sweet tight pussy?
Okay, this is what happens when translation is not taken seriously, but is done with Google Translate.
Thank you, Stefania. Everybody's laughing here, so you can you can hear, but we're really laughing out loud. Oh, thank you so much for this.
Thank
and
you.
Showing us the dangers of what happens when you don't do your job properly. and you write whatever. Anyway, thank you again. Thanks to Professor Stefania Taviano.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for this lovely lesson. And I'd like to ask you whether you would like to share the slides of your lessons with our students so they can do some work on it. Okay. Thank